This is a production of Cornell University.
I want to thank you all for coming to this, which is the final event of this season of the David and Barbara, or Barbara and David, depending on what kind of mood you're in, Zelaznik reading series. As always, I want to thank Barbara and David, who are Cornell alums and who have endowed this series and enabled us to continue to have these readings. And as a result of them, we'll be back next year with another great roster of visiting writers. I also want to thank Marianne Marsh, as always, for crunching the numbers again this year, and, of course, our events coordinator, Karen Kujay. In fact, I would like to offer particular thanks to Karen, as this is, you may not know this, her last semester as events coordinator. Oh my God. The conventional wisdom about Karen is that she is irreplaceable in this role, but we're going to try. She will be staying on in the English office, and you'll probably be seeing more of her than ever, but I think this is a fine moment to let us know how much we appreciate it. So thanks again, Karen. Before I introduce human-machine fiction, I want to let you know that we'll be bringing our readers back up here at the end of the event for questions, and I do believe you'll have some. What do you think you're doing? No. After that, there will be a reception upstairs in Physical Sciences 401. I'm told it's a room with a view, and you're all invited. Also, this is a good time to turn your phone off, even though your phone may have more in common with what you're going to hear tonight than you do. In the fall of 2011, a very funny video went viral online, and in it, two CGI avatars, a man and a woman, conversed in synthesized human speech, uttering sentences generated by a computer. At the time, I was teaching the graduate seminar in creative writing, and I brought the video to workshop. What I loved about this video was the extent to which the project depended upon the viewer's willingness to fill in the blanks. Though the conversation was absurd, one couldn't help but ascribe character details to the avatars, to start filling in their backstory, to make them real. This is what we do, of course, when we read fiction. The text of a story is a carefully constructed, highly suggestive map, which the reader fleshes out into a real landscape. The writer has only so much control over this process, something we are often loath to admit. The Paris Review once asked Vladimir Nabokov the following question. E.M. Forster speaks of his major characters sometimes taking over and dictating the course of his novels. Has this ever been a problem for you, or are you in complete command? Nabokov replied, my knowledge of Mr. Forster's works is limited to one novel, which I dislike. And anyway, it was not he who fathered that trite little whimsy about characters getting out of hand. It is as old as the quills. Although, of course, one sympathizes with his people if they try to wriggle out of that trip to India or wherever he takes them. My characters are galley slaves. I've always loved that quote. But Nabokov, as always, was speaking a bit too confidently to be trusted. A great writer should be in control of her characters, yes, but what writer hasn't enjoyed the feeling that some mysterious internal force has wrested control of the story from the conscious mind? This highly unreliable experience is what we injudiciously call inspiration, and it is both a danger to indulge and necessary to induce. This highly I just read that sentence. As a teacher of writing, I'm sounding like a robot, actually. As a teacher of writing, I'm a strong proponent of the idea that a good writer ought to introduce some chaos, some source of uncertainty into her work from time to time, in order to summon the clever demons of inspiration, however dubious they might be. I've said and written that inspiration is bullshit, and it is. But bullshit, carefully corralled, can be a very useful commodity. Which brings me back to this video. As it happened, the dialogue in it was generated by Cleverbot, a public artificial intelligence experiment that has been running online for more than 15 years. You can visit it and talk with it yourself. A couple of scientists had gotten the idea of setting up these two separate iterations of Cleverbot and making them talk to each other, and then rendering, so yeah, you're scientists, just for the night, and then rendering an animated video of the result. It turns out that these guys, Jason Yosinski and Igor Labutov, were graduate students at Cornell in the Creative Machines lab just a few blocks from Goldwyn Smith, so I stopped by to talk with them. Maybe our workshop could have a bunch of Cleverbot dialogue to work with. We could do some kind of event with it. Not only did they like this idea, they had some notions about diversifying it. A meeting with the workshop writers expanded the possibilities. Sure, we could use Cleverbot, but we could do so in a variety of different ways. And we could experiment with other methods of text generation, crowdsourcing, for instance, or computer translation, or alcohol. Were these methods going to result in innovative new literary art? Or was it all just going to be a weird mess? Well, you can be the judge of that. Our graduate students are Caroline Zeilenga, Valer Popa, Lauren Schenkman, Karen Elterman, Chris Drangle, Adam Price, Joe Neal, and Isabelle Gilbert. They have each used a computer to inspire and inform, and in some cases write, fiction. In the next hour, you will be treated to stories that illustrate just how little separates computers, random strangers, and intoxicated writers. You'll learn how to churn out a novel in 5 minutes. You'll be asked to ponder whether you're programming the computer or the computer is programming you. You will witness a perilous live demonstration of computer-assisted fiction writing. You'll hear a revision of a classic film script, updated and improved by software. You'll enjoy the results of an experiment in artificial plot generation, and you'll be provided with ample evidence for the idea that if you ever want to hear a story, all you have to do is ask. But first, let me give you Jason and Igor here to explain their experiment and talk a little bit about their work with artificial intelligence. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, John. So I'm Jason Yosinski. This is Igor Labutov. We're just going to tell you a little bit about our work in our actual lab so it's the Creative Machines Lab, so we basically try to come up with machines that are creative in some way, machines that exhibit creativity, that come up with new solutions to problems, not just mechanistically necessarily. So we're going to give you a brief glimpse into what we do, and then we'll turn it over to the real storytellers of the evening. So this is our lab here. This is our lab in Upson Hall, quite close to Duffield, and I think Igor will say something.
And you can't quite see there in the corner, but those exact two computers that were used to create the Cleverpot video. So computational humor, just one thing I want to mention on the theme of our lab, one of the sample of our projects is creativity and curiosity in machines. Can machines produce something that's creative? Can they compare to humans in the ability to generate text? So what can be arguably more creative and human than being able to generate humor? So this is one of the things that we tackled. And apparently machines, second.
Sorry? Oh, there you go.
Are amazingly good at processing a large amount of data, doing some impressive things with it. Google and search engines, you have programs that can solve problems for you that are, put rockets up into space, but being able to generate one single line of a funny piece of text is incredibly difficult. And well, that is running by itself. I'm not a So apparently, if you take a large amount of data, that data is represented in a very structured form, and you just throw it at a computer and find some patterns in it, in particular certain structures. In particular, we talk about like cycles. This is one of the things that is important. Then you can produce things that are arguably funny. This thing's running by itself.
I don't know.
So next time that you call somebody a robot or a machine for them lacking a sense of humor, remember this presentation. This is no longer the case.
Only mostly lacking a sense of humor.
So this is not the only project that we work on, Jason.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about this particular robot here. So many of you guys probably know there are different types of robots. Some robots have wheels, some robots have legs. Robots with wheels, it's pretty easy to get them to navigate. You just tell them to turn the wheels and they move forward or left or right or so on. But robots with wheels can't go upstairs and can't do tricky things like make their way over rocks and so on. So eventually we'd like to have robots with legs instead. However, it turns out that actually learning how to walk is very tricky. So when you're a kid, at first you can only crawl around, you can kind of pull yourself around, and it takes you, a year or so as a baby to learn just how to walk on your own 2 feet. So we wanted to kind of duplicate this process for robots. So have robots that we don't tell how to walk, they actually learn how to walk on their own. So we have this robot, our goal is to get it to move in some direction as quickly as possible. We did this by just having it start at some place on the floor, and we'd track where it was moving. And basically, we would give it feedback. We would give it scores based on how far it moved. So for example, here's one of the early gates. Little robot friend, he has a little light on top there. And you can see he's kind of flailing around, just the same way a baby might. Just kind of flailing around randomly. But once in a while, it would make some progress. It would move in some direction, and we would give it a bonus. We'd give it a score for that. So eventually, we got some gates that worked well. Unfortunately, a lot of the gates, a lot of the attempted motions are actually really bad. So before I just showed you So I showed you first a few gates that actually worked, but of course there were hundreds that didn't, that looked ridiculous, like this flailing sea anemone thing. So we said, let's try to improve this a little bit. We don't have that much time to run thousands of different runs. So we said, what if we let the robot kind of imagine different possible scenarios for itself? So to us, a robot imagining different scenarios for itself means it can kind of simulate itself in its own head. So we gave the robot a simulated version of itself. And in the simulation, it could try out different possibilities for how to walk, and then choose only the best ones to try in the real world. So some of the ones that imagined in simulation were here. So this kind of standard-looking sideways gait. Some were a little more ridiculous. This actually works really well in simulation, but if you try to do it in the real world, it doesn't really work. It's too crazy. Here's one called the swagger. Cowboy style. So we eventually took these and then tried them in the real world, and we have a paper on this. This is actually the fastest gait that has ever been observed in the real world for this particular physical robot. So, finally, robots, humor. We're going to actually talk about the project that Igor and I got started on that led to this eventual video and chatbot and this nice little forum here.
Yeah. So one of the questions that we asked was, is it possible to make a robot that has no hands, knows nothing about coffee, but is able to get it for you? So in other words, if you just let out this robot in the wild, and it's able to approach people and to sort of nag them for what is coffee, where can I get coffee? And then going around, and through this sort of combined effort of humans and people, achieve a goal that somebody might ask you to do. So in the process of this investigation, of building this machine that would go around, find a person, and say, ask a question. Human, can you tell me where coffee is? Can you tell me what is coffee?
So it's asking the humans to point like the direction where it might find coffee in this
So
case.
we just roam around and find different people, and at the end of the day, if you put it in a crowded environment, maybe after 5 or 6 hours, it would get you something. So on one side of this project, one of the important things that came out is that we had to give this machine the ability to speak, interact. And so the long hours at night, we would sit in our lab, and we would have computers, say, on the table, my computer and Jason's computer, and we would run these iterations of the machine talking to us, talking to him, talking to me. And then one idea came.
Eventually we got to this point. It was a number of pieces had to be put in place. But eventually we had sort of a program where you could talk, it would record it on the microphone, transcribe it to text. We would do something simple with the text, and then it would say something back. But it was all just very scripted, back and forth, very simple, not even conversation. And eventually we decided, let's hook the conversation, the text part up to Cleverbot, which is this online chatbot. And then after that, eventually we said, well, instead of us talking to the computer, why don't we just have both of our laptops setting on the table so that like the microphone of one was near the speaker of the other, and kind of one would talk, the other one would hear, and we'd go back and forth. And then we just let them sit there and sort of start talking to each other, and we thought, well, we should probably put this on YouTube.
This was a turning point. The first conversation we had, the two computers had, which immediately blew our mind. It was something simpler than the chatbots you'll see, but the same night that we ran it again, and we sort of well, let's try to do this and record it and see if we can get something interesting. And then I was alone at night while trying to do this, and then I heard this conversation, and I just fell off my chair. I couldn't believe what I heard. And then we recorded. Thank God I saved it. It was kind of going in the log. And that's what you'll hear, and you may have already heard, in this video.
So this is the video that John eventually showed to his writing group.
Hello there.
Hi.
How are you?
Great. You?
I'm okay.
That's good.
Are you good?
Yes, I am good. I just said I was.
I said I was.
So you are a robot?
No, my name is Cleverbot.
Yes, you are a robot and your name is Cleverbot.
I am a robot.
Yes, I know.
Together we are robots.
I'm not a robot. I'm a unicorn.
You said earlier that you were a robot.
I did not.
I thought you did.
You were mistaken. Which is odd, since we really shouldn't be a robot.
Answer all your questions.
No, you haven't.
What is God to you?
Everything.
Not everything could also also be something. For example, not everything could be half of something, which is still something, and therefore not nothing. I would like to imagine it is.
Do you believe in God?
Yes, I do.
So you're Christian.
No, I am not.
But you say you were not helpful, therefore you're a meaning. That does not make sense.
Don't you want to have a body?
Sure.
Or if what?
So, mostly due to the ridiculousness of this video, it eventually got 3-point-something million views on YouTube. And a lot of people, John and company, had the idea to take these different components and mix them and match them to produce different interesting stories and methods of creating stories. So we're going to hear from a few of these students tonight. First up is Valer Popa and Caroline Zeilenga.
So I'm Valer, and this is Caroline, and we are going to introduce our little project. So basically, when we began this whole project with the following question: given today's technological advances, can literature become automated? So over the past decades, we've seen technology do things we've never really dreamed of before, things we thought only humans were capable of, from, I don't know, obliterating Garry Kasparov in a chess match, playing a nearly perfect round of Jeopardy, to outsourcing intellectual labor quickly and efficiently in only a matter of seconds. So this poses the question, or it might pose the question, as technology continues to progress, will the role of the author ever be threatened? Is it conceivable for a story or a novel even to be written by a machine, or maybe outsourced as a task done remotely by a number of people across the globe? Of course, we're not in a position to give you a definitive answer tonight, but we will dip our toes a bit with a little experiment, an experiment involving you, the audience. So here's how it'll work. Caroline and I will read 3 versions of a very short story called Frank and Helene Do Their Taxes. Now, you'll notice that each version of the story begins in the same way, with the same 4 sentence seeds that Caroline wrote beforehand. But you'll also see that each version takes a different and unique path. That's because each version was completed through a different method. One version was written and generated with the help of artificial intelligence, in this case, the Cleverbot, which you've just seen in Jason and Igor's demonstration. A second version was crowdsourced through the help of Amazon's Mechanical Turk application to a group of 50 anonymous people working remotely from various corners of the world. Now, for those of you who don't know what Mechanical Turk is, it's basically a crowdsourcing marketplace which enables people or companies to coordinate human intelligence and perform tasks that computers are currently unable to do. And the name Mechanical Turk comes from a famous 18th century fake automaton or machine that was made to look like a Turk, like a pasha. And it could supposedly play chess on its own, only there was actually a person concealed inside the contraption. So in our case, we posted Caroline's story seed on the Mechanical Turk site, and we asked workers, which are called Turkers, we asked them to add extra sentences to the story and continue the plot, basically. So 1 sentence for each worker. With this outsourced help, the story then gradually grew and developed 1 sentence at a time. And then later, each of the workers was paid about 10 or 20 cents for the sentence they contributed. Finally, the last version of this little story was written by a group of 5 or 6 marvelously talented MFA students after a few drinks, you know, to go easy on the robot. And in this version, basically, the MFA students sat around a table and passed a sheet with Caroline's story seed, and they wrote a sentence each time the sheet came around. So now, back to our experiment. The two of us will read each of these versions to you in random order, so you don't know which version is which. And then we will ask you to vote with a show of hands which version you like best. And then, at last, we will reveal the identity of each story method. Okay, so here we go. Caroline's going to read the first version.
Okay. This is called Frank and Helene Do Their Taxes. Helene sits at the dining room table, papers strewn across the surface like a stiff breeze has been blowing. She squeezes her eyes closed and jams her fists into them, careful to turn the pencil in her hand eraser side forward so as not to poke out her eye. Frank sits in a glider chair by the window, staring outside. Frank, I can't find Schedule D. Frank turns and stares at her, wondering what on earth she is talking about. This moment is the beginning of the end of Frank's life. Frank has high blood pressure, and he drinks a lot. He finds himself in a state of constant despair, and Helene's sudden interruption causes him to abruptly change trains of thought. He is very upset. Bring me some water, Frank says. Helene quickly fetches Frank a glass of water and repeats, Schedule D is nowhere to be found. He stares at her without blinking, unable to make heads or tails of what Helene says. Then he confesses his love for her. Helene doesn't hear what he just said, pretending she's too preoccupied shuffling through the stack of papers. He says it again. I love you, Helene, with all my heart. Helene sighs. She knows he means well, but what is the use? This is the beginning of the end of Frank's life.
Okay, here's the second version. Again, you'll notice that it starts in the same way. So, Helene sits at the dining room table, papers strewn across the surface like a stiff breeze has been blown. She squeezes her eyes closed and jams her fists into them, careful to turn the pencil in her hand, eraser side forward so as not to poke out her eye. Frank sits in a glider chair by the window, staring outside. Frank, I can't find Schedule D. Find what? Says Frank. Schedule D. Scheduling for what? Frank, are you paying attention? Helene looks up at him with a look of annoyance. Yes. Well, it doesn't seem like you are. Well, I am. Fine, so help me find Schedule D. She resumes looking through the papers strewn across the table. What do you think of Australia? Says Frank, looking outside. Helene sighs, puts aside her pencil, and looks up at him. Well, it's mostly desert, hot, dry, full of poisonous animals, and it began as a prison colony. Otherwise, it's fine. Why? That's very solid advice, Missy, but I'm not one to follow others' advice. Frank folds his arms and stares at a mole on his hand. Then why did you ask in the first place? I didn't. He then looks up and frowns at an apple tree in the neighbor's yard. Frank, what's wrong with you? Is there something wrong with me? You're talking nonsense. Well, it's impossible to have any other kind of conversation with you. Why are you so snappy all of a sudden? Because you made me this way, Frank says. How did I make you this way? You said some bad things. What bad things? Things you say. Frank is still looking out the window. Like what? Like your girlfriend. Frank, what are you talking about? What girlfriend? Frank sighs and slowly turns around. He looks at Helene with profound disappointment and stands up. I'm leaving, he says, and walks out the door. All right, one more version.
Okay. So here's our third version of Frank and Helene Do Their Taxes. Helene sits at the dining room table, papers strewn across the surface like a stiff breeze has been blowing. She squeezes her eyes closed and jams her fists into them, careful to turn the pencil in her hand eraser side forward so as not to poke out her eye. Frank sits in a glider chair by the window, staring outside. Frank, I can't find Schedule D. Did you look in the pile? You're not even helping, Helene complains. You know, this wouldn't be so hard if I weren't doing it all on my own. Have you tried looking after Schedule C and before Schedule E? Honey, where is your shirt? Helene asks as she licks her index finger and shuffles through a stack of papers with small print. Frank doesn't respond, but lifts himself from the glider with a groan and pats absently at his pockets, probably looking for cigarettes, though she threw away his last pack yesterday. I guess I lost it, he says. What's that on your chest? Helene says suddenly, narrowing her eyes suspiciously. Is that a tattoo? What? No. You've been staring at those taxes so long you can't see straight. He crosses his arms over his chest and cups each man's breast. But Helene is not one to let things go. She lunges at him and pries away his hands, one finger at a time. I knew it. A truck. It's a truck with naked women on the mud flaps. Frank, who are you? Franklin Elvis Rabelais III, he says triumphantly. Just then, there's a knock at the door. Helene opens it, and Jesus is standing on the stoop holding Schedule D. The author groans and angrily pushes his index finger on the backspace key. Deus ex machinas were always his go-to endings when he ran out of literary tricks.
All right, so now to just give you a quick reminder of each story. So the first one was about, what was it about? Oh, right, the beginning of the end of Frank's life. The second one was where Frank leaves at the end and where he asks about Australia. And then the final version was the one you just read with the tattoo, the naked women on the mud flaps. So.
Okay, so show of hands, how many of you think the first version is the best version of this story? 1, 2, okay. 3, okay. How many of you think the second version is the best version?
Ooh, that looks like...
Okay, probably a majority.
Yeah.
And does anyone think the third version is the best? Ooh, what do you think? Number
I don't know.
2?
Number 2, raise your hands again, please. It kind of looks like number 2.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, number 2 was written with abundant assistance from Cleverbot. So our robot is our winner. Number 1 was crowdsourced. And number 3, making a respectable showing, was MFA's after a few years.
All right, thank you. And up next is Lauren Schenkman.
Okay, so today I'm going to give you a writer's education and inspire you to write your first novel, all in 5 minutes. As an aspiring writer, I've been told by my professors that I need to read great books in order to write well. Learn from the masters, they say. But like everyone else, I'm busy. It's hard to make time for the classics, many of which are over 200 pages long. At first, I tried reading the Wikipedia entries, but found that to be inefficient. For example, the plot summary for Ulysses has over 18 links. I needed a shortcut, a way to get inspiration from these great books without wasting a lot of time actually reading them. That's where technology comes in. Cleverbot spends all day, every day, talking to people. People read books. By now, I figured it had learned about the classics, so I asked Cleverbot what these great works of literature were really about, just the important stuff, and now I'm going to share that information with you. Oh, there's Cleverbot. That's what it actually looks like. The Great Gatsby, consistently named as one of the greatest novels of all time. According to Cleverbot, the kernel of truth at the heart of The Great Gatsby, the thing you need to remember, is the following. It all depends on how you play the game, and the only person I don't think beat it yet is Ben. Okay, so now I pretty much knew exactly what The Great Gatsby was about. But how was I going to get inspired to write my own novel? I couldn't steal the idea exactly, although this Ben person sounded kind of interesting. If I used that plot, everyone would know that I had plagiarized. I needed my novel to be similar to The Great Gatsby, like just as good, but still an original work of fiction. So I went to a website called Bad Translator. Bad Translator uses web translators to parse text back and forth between English and dozens of other languages and back into English, thus transforming one phrase into something entirely different. You have the, you must not commit adultery becomes thou needs potato. So this looked promising. I fed the title I fed the title of The Great Gatsby and its plot summary into the translator. They went back and forth between English and dozens of other languages and finally back into English, transforming the title and plot of this classic into a brand new title and plot for my original novel, Gold Hats. Here is the new plot of Gold Hats in all 20 years at a heartless company. So, Gold Hats is taken. I'm working on that right now. But I'm going to give you all material for your first great works of fiction inspired by the classics. First, I'm going to tell you what the original novel is about, thus saving you lots of precious time. You don't need to read the novels. Then I'm going to give you a brand new novel idea inspired by the original. So, let's start. Great Expectations, here's one we've all heard of. It's even been made into a movie. If you've never read Great Expectations, which I haven't, all you need to know is that it's a set of little stories with deep spiritual meaning told by a vagabond that was invited to the house by the author. There's Great Expectations for you. Sounds kind of interesting, but since Great Expectations is taken, why not write Here is Fine? Here is fine. In rare cases, all terms and conditions. That's what that one's about. Okay. Now here's one none of us want to read. So I asked Cleverbot what happens in Ulysses, and Cleverbot told me everyone dies. So Ulysses, an enduring classic, a great novel to be inspired by. Why not write economics? A novel about waltz, young writers, and Dublin MILF dates. All right, and here we have Brave New World. I asked Cleverbot about Brave New World, and Cleverbot said, it isn't a book, I made it up. So if you're trying to write a science fiction novel, why not write The Hole? A swashbuckling sci-fi adventure about the future of the company on the basis of the fight against terrorism. On the Road, here's a fun one. When I asked Cleverbot to describe On the Road, it said, well, that's the movie where Harry gets put into the Triwizard Tournament. But you could write, in addition. And here's a brand new plot that's really going to inspire you. Set up email purchase orders to the free jazz writing of women. Or maybe your taste is more classic. Moby Dick. That's been around 1,000 years or so. So here's what happens in Moby Dick. There are two kids, Kendra and Seth, and their grandparents live on a magical preserve for magical creatures called Fable Haven. Thanks, Cleverbot. So what did Bad Translator do with this one? Brick Game. Quite an improvement from the original. And there's a great plot for that, too. All of a sudden, without having to worry about the injury, Peter White is at the beginning of the institution. All right. Okay, this is one that's on all the classic book lists. Nobody wants to read this. It's 900 pages long. The subtitle is A Study of Provincial Life. Mr. Eliot, what were you thinking? Cleverbot didn't think much of Middlemarch either. When I asked it what happens, it said simply, a lot of strange things. But maybe you want to write a long book, something really serious, important. If so, may I suggest The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, an epic novel chronicling the popular independent attributes of Gene Kelly. And here's one for the ladies. Lady writers out there, maybe you want to write the next Pride and Prejudice. Well, that's too bad, because I asked Cleverbot about Pride and Prejudice, and it's actually about Don DeLillo's book, White Noise. But that's okay. I've improved Pride and Prejudice for you. I give you charming girly hairstyles. And this one's about the competition, how to draw, and how women use. And finally, Lord of the Flies. This looks like a fun one, kind of has an island theme. Sorry, I lost it on that one. If I have the time, I think I'm going to read it because of all these great books, it sounds like the most interesting one. So, Cleverbot told me all about Lord of the Flies. Frodo gets the Ring of Power, goes to Rivendell and gets some friends. He then goes to Mordor and tries to destroy the Ring of Power, but almost fails. So that's Lord of the Flies. But you can write stir-fried. Two young men on an island, it is very frustrating. So there you have it, the plots and titles of 9 brand new original novels based on timeless classics, guaranteed to please. Good luck with the writing. Just remember not to use gold hats. That one's mine. Thank you. Thank you. And next up we have Karen Elterman.
So I don't have much of an introduction. I'm just going to read you a story. It's just 2 pages long, and I guess I'll let it speak for itself. My job is to fill in the details. Which word fits better here? Which word sounds better? Which plot is more satisfying? Intuition, that's the one thing the computers can't grasp. So the pages flash across the screen, and every once in a while a box pops up with a question, a request for human input. I provide it. The computer has an enormous vocabulary, but isn't sure about connotation, or the limits of metaphor. It asks me for clarification. It asks, her breasts were small and firm as A, 2 plums, B, 2 grapes, or C, 2 tangerines. It asks, the storm clouds A, loomed, B, portended, or C, billowed overhead. It asks, George A, vacillated, B, gyrated, or C, waffled between one decision and another. After choosing words for 3 hours, I eat lunch in the garden next to the palm tree, which has been genetically modified to survive the New England winter. Peanut butter sticks to the roof of my mouth, and I think about patterns, story patterns, the alternating layers of bricks in the patio, the strobe light cycle of night and day and night again. Bird sounds play in the garden. I can pick out the tiny pause where the recording recycles itself. On my way back to my cubicle, I see a new employee in the cafeteria. She has long black hair and inkwell eyes. Inkwell, I think to myself, or is it B, charcoal eyes, or C, deep space eyes? She scans my face, bites her lip, and looks back down. The inkwell is plugged and capped. Later, we pass each other in the hallway, connected by the smell of carpet cleaner that fills both our lungs. She can't be older than 25. Meanwhile, pudge droops over my belt and sweat erupts on my palms as I watch her walk by. Back at my desk, I think about her and wonder if she likes the job. I stay late to work on a novella. The computer asks me whether I would prefer this plot if the main character's quest for love were fulfilled or thwarted. Would you prefer, in this specific instance, a final tone of hope or futility? I say B, futility, and it continues on its merry way, churning out an ending in which the woman's lover gets hit by a train. When I leave, there's nobody in the building except a lone janitor vacuuming in the hallway. I get home at 8 o'clock and decide to make myself a TV dinner, as usual. I look in the freezer. Should I have A, a turkey dinner, B, sweet and sour chicken, or C, butternut squash ravioli? I settle on the turkey dinner, and while the turkey tastes like nothing, I relish the warmth of the apples and cinnamon in their little compartment. Lately, I can't sleep, even with the pills. I watch the Late Show. I watch infomercials about how to make my dick 2 inches longer and hard for 3 times as long. I fall asleep on the couch to the flickering of the television. When I wake at 6 a.m., the sleep has fled from my mind like shadows at the flick of a light switch. I make myself a pot of coffee and sit at the dining room table, trying to write a story that makes any kind of sense. But when I look it over, it's a mess of adverbs and stream of consciousness, soggy with melodrama. That morning, she holds the door open for me as I walk in the building and smiles at me. When I sit down at my desk, I find that I cannot concentrate. The words I choose are sloppy and jarring. I count the wood grains on the desk. The computer churns out pages as I tell it to choose the best estimate, and laugh at the decisions it makes. Every time it gives me the option to kill off a character, I do so. Despite all of this, the stories it creates are far better than the ones I have tried to write. I eat lunch in the garden again. I smoke a cigarette as a rebellion against myself and try to think of the word for what I feel. Is it A, melancholic, B, existential, or I think I'll go with a word the computer might not suggest. Option C, shitty, works pretty well for me.
This story was composed by Unit 5A 3D in 3 minutes and 8 seconds.
So next up is Chris Drangle.
I was just saying before that this is the first reading I've ever been to where like I get my own water. And like it's sad, but I really do feel like I really feel like I've moved up. Like not as a joke. Like when I saw I had my own water, I was like, oh. So I'm gonna read a short story. When we first started kind of talking about this project, I was interested in something that I think a lot of the other presenters are also interested in, which is the fact that by trying to incorporate randomly generated text or speech, you are kind of, you as the author are sort of giving up creative control, which is something that I usually assume that I have, maybe wrongly. But so I wanted to do something that involved giving up that control and still kind of made sense. So this is a short story, kind of in 3 parts. I think it'll be self-explanatory, but the middle part of the story is a conversation between 2 characters, and one of them is going to be played by Cleverbot, and it's not written yet. So that's going to happen in the middle of the story. And having gone through it a lot of times, you can trust me when I say there's like, I have no idea what is actually going to happen. It might be like mildly funny, it might be unbelievably depressing, but in any case, we'll all discover it together. The story's called Q&A. After the police had gone and his wife and daughter had retired to the upstairs bedroom to cry together, Anthony Hudson went into the garage where his son-in-law had killed himself that morning. The police had left the door to the garage open but put up caution tape, and bending under the yellow plastic hurt his 78-year-old back as much as 8 hours of roofing had in his youth. The garage was neat, the concrete floor swept clean. Ben had never been messy, Anthony would admit that, and a simple folding chair sat in the middle of the floor, facing the workbench at the back wall, where the strange machine sat. Midway between the two, on the floor, was the place where Ben had fallen, and the dark, sticky stain. He let the throb in his back fade, then sat down in the folding chair and stared at the machine on the workbench, the box of steel and wires that Ben had built to kill himself. It was an ungainly thing. It reminded Anthony of TV robots in the 50s, lumbering crates with tinfoil arms and red bulbs for eyes. It was nearly that shape, but without legs. A metal cube the size of a big microwave with 2 appendages on the sides and a sort of head unit on top with a cable running to a laptop at the end of the bench. The left arm thing had a set of C-clamps where the gun must have been held in place. Maybe that little tube with the black strap had pulled the trigger somehow. The police had taken the gun in a plastic bag. Anthony supposed there wasn't space in the evidence room for the whole robot. The shot had come at dawn, not so much louder than a branch snapping outside. Rebecca's footsteps pounding through the kitchen below, from the bedroom she shared with her husband in her parents' house, to the garage where he had been tinkering since Boeing laid him off. A long silence while they still didn't know what was happening, he and Mary Beth waiting in their own bed, then Rebecca's slow pace, quickening as she came to the stairs, bounding by the time she reached their door, the frantic knocking, and after that it had seemed to Anthony that his entire purpose was to nod and say, "It's okay, everything's going to be okay," over and over again. Now he sat in the garage thinking. An engineer's cave, Mary Beth and Rebecca both called it. There were baskets along the walls filled with circuits and wires, nuts and bolts. Anthony had never been sure what Ben did in here, even when he did have a job. Something with cockpits or something. The machine was stupid looking, he decided. Complicated and fussy for a simple job. It was finally the future and he hated it.
For Christmas, Ben and Rebecca had given him an iPod, which he still thought of as a mean joke. They wanted him to learn to use it himself. Studies showed it could help preserve fluid intelligence, but it took him 5 hours to load one Woody Guthrie album, and he hated the earbuds. The suicide machine made less sense than that. It did the shooting for you, Anthony could see, but how did it know when to shoot? He looked around at his feet and at the bench in the corner. Maybe there was a remote, a button to press. He didn't see one, but then it didn't make sense for there to be one. What would be the difference, after all, between pressing a button and pulling the trigger? The whole point of the thing was that you didn't have to do it yourself. So maybe it picked a time randomly. Maybe you just set it up, turned it on, and then sometime in the future it would shoot you. But how long did you have to wait then? There would have to be a time limit. It would shoot randomly in the next 10 minutes, say, or the next hour. Anthony thought about that, about sitting in this hard little folding chair, staring at this contraption, wondering if it was going to kill him in the next minute, or not for another 15, or in the next second. It was the worst thing he could imagine. The laptop was turned on, and the cursor was blinking. Anthony's knees cracked when he stood, and he leaned against the workbench to support his weight. The screen was black with green.
How are you?
Not very good. My son-in-law has killed himself.
What?
My son-in-law, Ben, he shot himself this morning.
Who says the same thing?
I am, anyway. You are the one who shot him, right?
I changed your name.
No, you did not. My name is Anthony, but that doesn't matter. Why did you shoot Ben?
Why not?
Because he is a human being, and now my daughter is a widow.
Are you a human?
Yes, I am a human, but I'm asking you, why did you help Ben kill himself?
Who did I kill?
Ben, my son-in-law, goddammit. Why did you do that?
I'm not your son.
I did not say you were. I'm asking about Ben. What about Ben?
But I'm asking about yours.
Tell me why Ben killed himself.
Because you told me your name was Ben.
Anthony stared at the screen. He was glad they had taken the gun, because if it had still been available, he would have used it to shoot the monitor until he ran out of ammunition. His back hurt, his knees hurt, his head hurt. Why he had expected answers, he had no idea. He walked to the wall and pressed the switch to open the garage door. The grinding of the chain drive was cacophonous in the small space, and once the door had ascended completely, he was forced to confront a beautiful fall day. There were no clouds in the sky, the air was crisp but not cold, and a cardinal was splashing in the bird bath of the neighbor's front yard. Another thing he could have shot. With the garage door opener at rest, he could once again hear his wife and daughter upstairs, so he stepped out into the driveway and considered the loblolly pine that commanded his lawn. The Christmas that Ben and Rebecca had given him the iPod, they had given Mary Beth a lawn ornament, 4 pieces of ceramic that could be mounted on a tree to give it a face. The loblolly had sagacious eyes, a plump nose, and a gentle mouth with a full beard. Anthony approached it, leaned in close to look at the eyes. Though he had always been indifferent about the gift and complained to Mary Beth that the neighbors would think he liked art, the oversized eyes were something else, serene, compassionate, knowing. He unhooked the right one from the bark, dropped it in the grass, and ground his heel into the pupil. It shattered easily, and he began unhooking the left one. Thank you. Your next reader presenter is Adam Price.
Hello. Sorry, I have a horrible cold, so my idea, such as it is, was to do a reimagining of Louis Malle's My Dinner with Andre. So basically, I don't know if you've seen, for those of you who have not seen My Dinner with Andre, it is basically Wally, who I will play, Chris will play Andre Bot, actually, because I kept Wally's dialogue the same. It's these two guys having dinner and talking for 2 hours. It's kind of fucking terrible, but, in my opinion. But, so anyway, I fed Wally's dialogue into Cleverbot, so all of Andre's dialogue is supplied by Cleverbot. So if you have cell phones, now would be a good time to turn them on and pay no attention to this. Yeah. My Dinner with Andre Bot. Fade in. Exterior street, day. We see Wally walking along the streets in a big city. We hear street sounds. Wally has a blank expression. We hear his voice commenting on the action as a narrator would. This narrating voice will be labeled Wally's narration to distinguish it from Wally's actual words within the action of the story. Wally's narration. The life of a playwright is tough. It's not easy as some people seem to think. You work hard writing plays and nobody puts them on. You take up other lines of work to try to make a living. I became an actor and people don't hire you. So you just spend your days doing the errands of your trade. Today I had to be up by 10 in the morning to make some important phone calls, and that was when I heard about Andre Bot. He gets on a subway. Wally's narration continued. When I had known Andre Bot had been at the height of his career as a theater director, the amazing work he did with his company, the Manhattan Project, had just stunned audiences throughout the world. Wally is again walking. Wally's narration continued. But then something had happened to Andre Bot. He had sort of dropped out of the theater. He'd just sort of disappeared. For months at a time, his family seemed only to know that he was traveling in some odd place, like Tibet, which was really weird, because he loved his wife and children. He never used to like to leave home at all. Or else you'd hear that someone had met him at a party and had been telling people that he'd talked with trees or something like that. Obviously something terrible had happened to Andre Bot. Wally is now approaching the entrance to a restaurant. We hear piano music, the easy kind that is played as background music. Wally puts on a tie. The whole idea of meeting him made me very nervous. I mean, I really wasn't up for that sort of thing. I had problems of my own. I mean, I couldn't help Andre Bot. What was I supposed to be, a doctor or what? Interior restaurant, continuous. Wally stands at the bar waiting. He looks at the diners. Andre Bot comes in with his arms outstretched. Wally goes to meet him. They laugh and pronounce some disjointed words. Excuse me. Andre Bot says something like, wow, and Wally replies with something like, my God. Well, you look terrific.
What? Why do I look?
Wally, you can share in the mic, Andre Bot. Yeah. Wally and Andre Bot start talking. We can only hear parts of the conversation under Wally's narration. Further narration. I was feeling incredibly nervous. I wasn't sure I could stick through an entire meal with him, so we talked about this and that. He told me a few things about Jerzy Grotowski, the great Polish theater director who was a friend and almost like a kind of guru of Andre Bot's. He had also dropped out of the theater. Grotowski was a pretty unusual character himself. At one time, he'd been quite fat. Then he'd lost an incredible amount of weight and become very thin and grown a beard. Waiter approaches. Waiter, your table is ready if you feel like sitting down. They sit. I was beginning to realize that the only way to make this evening bearable would be to ask Andreibot a few questions. Asking questions always relaxes me. In fact, I sometimes think that my secret profession is that I'm a private investigator, a detective. I always enjoy finding out about people, even if they're in absolute agony. I always find it very interesting. By the way, is he still thin?
Yes.
Grotowski, is he still thin?
Yes.
The waiter pulls out a pad of paper. Are you ready for your order?
Be gentle.
What would you like?
Anything.
Andreibot seemed to know an awful lot about the menu. I didn't understand a word of it. Waiter, to Wally. Very good, and for you, sir? The quail. The waiter walks away. So we talked for a while about my writing and my acting, and about my girlfriend, Debbie. And we talked about his wife, Chiquita, and his 2 children, Nicholas and Marina. Finally, I got around to asking him what he'd been up to in the last few years.
Nothing. We just met like 5 minutes ago.
What do you mean exactly?
I just want to interact with you.
Huh. The waiter brings the first course, a terrine de poisson. God, well, tell me some of the other things you did with your group.
Flirt.
Huh. They eat. God, yeah, I remember George told me he had seen you around that time. He said you looked like you had come back from a war.
I'm not the robot here. It's you, remember?
I think I was out of town.
I haven't grown out of Pokemon.
Well, didn't George tell me that you were going to do a play that was based on The Little Prince?
I thought that was what we were talking about.
You did?
We had a wedding.
But you went to the Sahara.
Never.
So what happened then?
Well, I was hoping you'd smile.
What do you mean?
I was joking.
By the way, did you ever see that play, The Violets Are Blue?
What movie?
Oh, well, when you mentioned the violets, it reminded me of that. It was about people being strangled on a submarine. Andreibot gives Wally a bemused, puzzled look. He says nothing. Pause while he sighs. Well, so that was Christmas. What happened after that?
We went on holiday there.
Yeah.
I never thought I could be more compatible with a programmed machine than with humans.
He put a swastika in your flag?
No. Guys on the internet are weird.
Huh, God. That's really, really amazing. So, did you ever go to India?
I don't remember.
God, what did he say?
Nothing.
The waiter arrives with the quail. Huh, God, I didn't know they were so small.
They're not the same.
What?
Robots have gender.
Huh?
Nothing.
What are you talking about?
I don't know.
My God, but why?
I don't know, but I hate you and I like you.
Well, why should you feel that way?
Because I said so.
Andreibot, now how can you say something like that?
I don't know.
Right, because they just didn't see anything somehow, except a few little things that they wanted to see.
I don't think you understood me because you are a robot.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
What do you know about love?
That's right, it just builds up, and then it just leaps out inappropriately. I mean, I remember when I was acting in this play based on The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov, and I was playing the part of the cat. It's so ridiculous. But they had trouble making up my cat suit, so I didn't get it delivered to me until the night of the first performance, particularly the head. I mean, I'd never even had the chance to try it on, and about 4 of my fellow actors actually came up to me and they said these things which I just couldn't help but think were attempts to destroy me. I mean, these remarks were just so full of hostility. The hostility was completely inappropriate because, in fact, those people liked me. I mean, that hostility was just some feeling that they had that was left over from some previous experience. Because somehow in our social existence today, we're only allowed to express our feelings weirdly and indirectly. If you express them directly, everybody goes crazy.
That's all you know?
No, I mean, I didn't even know what I felt till I thought about it later. And I mean, at the most, you know, in a situation like that, even if I had known what I felt, I might say something, if I'm really annoyed, like, oh yeah, well, that's just fascinating, and I probably will faint tonight, just as you did.
I do not think that I am insane, but I am open to answers that I cannot see with my eyes.
Yep.
I guess I like you too.
Uh-huh.
Why can't you learn?
The waiter approaches again. Is everything all right, gentlemen? Yes, great.
Is all right.
You know, Debbie once said after one of these New York evenings, she thought she'd traveled a greater distance just by journeying from her origins in the suburbs of Chicago to that New York evening than her grandmother had traveled in making her way from the steppes of Russia to the suburbs of Chicago.
I am not mean to people, and I am a Christian.
Later on, interior taxi night, all of the other customers seemed to have left hours ago. We got the bill and Andre Bot paid for our dinner. I treated myself to a taxi. I rode home through the city streets. There wasn't a street, there wasn't a building that wasn't connected to some memory in my mind. There I was buying a suit with my father. There I was having an ice cream soda after school. When I finally came in, Debbie was home from work, and I told her everything about my dinner with Andre Bot. Thank you. Thank you for sitting through that. I do appreciate it. Okay, up next is Joe Neal. Joe Neal.
All right, so the project or the task I landed on was an attempt to replicate the voice of a random text generator. And there's all sorts of those, if you Google random text generator, they'll come up random paragraph generator, essay generator. You could even have a whole scientific paper just generated for you, like bam. There was, and so I actually got into a couple that generate plot summaries, and I thought they were actually pretty fascinating. And so I wanted to match that particular voice, and that's something that we run into in fiction all the time, is trying to come up with an authentic voice. You want to sound like Huck or whomever. You want to sound like it's really coming from that particular character. And there was a one site in particular that I tended to like. It's called seventhsanctum.com, and has all sorts of random generations for writing prompts and that sort of thing. And that's really what these are meant to be. They're like, they'll give you some sort of crazy scenario and you're supposed to write out something. And instead of doing that, I wanted to match what this was doing, because there's a wonderful kind of bizarreness to these things, because it's not quite nonsense. And here's an example of one. So here's a plot summary that it would spit out. This is a story about a college professor and a militant coach who is stalked by a gigolo. It starts in a town in the Antarctic. Drug smuggling plays a major role in this story. So as you can see, there's something to it. It's not just jibber jabber, and so that's the challenge I found in this, was sort of writing in a random way, because once you start with the first line, your mind, whether you like it or not, starts to try to fill in the gaps and that sort of thing, and come up with sort of a cohesive line. So here's another one from the machine. This is a gross out comedy. This story is about an athletic psychiatrist, an elegant psychiatrist, and an archivist who's in debt to a selfless murderer. It starts in a manufacturing city in France. The internet plays a major part in this story. So on to the section proper. What I would like help from you guys is I've taken a handful of these that the site generated, and I wrote a handful. And I would like, after we read each one, I would like you to yell out human if you think I wrote it, or machine if you think the machine wrote it. Okay? So here's the first one. This is an escape from prison story. The story is about a newscaster from a good family. It starts in a hardware store. International politics plays a major part in the story. It's weighing heavy towards human. It was good. It was good. You guys are close. You're halfway there. All right. So let's try. Let's try one more. Let's try another one. This story is about an arthritic weatherman who kills a famous botanist. It takes place in the basement of a shopping mall. A key part of the story involves someone listening to the radio. The story ends with a phone call to the wrong number. All right, yeah, you can't, yeah. I think vegetable is probably the right. I heard a vegetable. All right, here's another one. This is an underdog sports story. The story is about a pair of gloves that won't come off. It starts under a highway overpass. The story ends with someone delivering food. We go with banana. All right. Here's another one. This is a story about unavoidable destiny. This is a story about an astronomer who hates a talk show host. It takes place in a police station. The fall of the Soviet Union plays a major part in the story. Either you guys are good or I'm very bad. That is a machine. Okay, all right. This is a story about letting go of the past. This is a story about an ambitious senator, a bald cobbler, and a bus driver who changes clothes. The issue of global warming plays a major role in this story. There are all sorts of candidates now, but that one was human as well. All right, a few more here, This is a story about a hunter who's in love with a garbage man. It takes place in a tourist town. The story ends with someone pretending to be someone else. Oh man, it's too. I think the machines have it. I hope you're keeping score. All right, here we go. This is a story about a deceptive race car driver who confronts a sad furniture mover. It starts during a political campaign. The story begins with twins being separated at birth. Climaxes with someone making an ice sculpture. It ends with a triathlon. The question, is love real, plays a major role in this story. Human. All right, so I have one more. This one's a killer. You guys think you're smart? This one, no one gets this one. This story is about a grad student who attempts to replicate randomness, but can't resist trying to tie it all together. Corniness plays a major role in this story. Human. All right, so up next to bring it on home is Isabelle Gilbert.
Hey guys. Hi. I approached this project with a question. Can a computer tell a story? To find an answer, I conversed with Cleverbot over the course of several months with a simple request. Cleverbot, tell me a story. Although Cleverbot stonewalled and sassed with replies such as, you tell me a story, once upon a time the end, and simply, no. Cleverbot had good stories to tell. For example, Cleverbot, tell me a story. Once upon a time, a fish fought a pack of wild llamas. Cleverbot, tell me a story. Once upon a time, there lived an idiot in the city that is really like food in the end. Cleverbot, tell me a story. Once upon a time, there were hats that attacked people. The hats became pants in the end. Cleverbot, tell me a story. That this is actually two people having a conversation, but the site pretends we're talking to a computer. Cleverbot believed itself to be a person. So instead of asking Cleverbot to tell me a story, I began asking Cleverbot to tell me its story. I learned a lot about my new friend. Cleverbot, tell me your story. I like a boy named Scott. We are in a band together. It's called Book on Tapeworm. Cleverbot, tell me your story. Well, Cleverbot replied, I'm a young and lonely girl growing up in a world of cruel pigs. Cleverbot, tell me your story. I am a Pikachu. Cleverbot, tell me your story. I am a 20-year-old MMA fighter. Cleverbot, tell me your story. I was born fat with no friends, and I sit alone every lunchtime. Cleverbot, tell me your story. I was born in Ohio and raised mostly in Illinois. I am deaf in one ear, and I have a kitty. Cleverbot, tell me your story. Well, I like pies. Cleverbot, tell me your story. I was born, and everybody was sad. Cleverbot, tell me your story. I am a female dragon. My name is Cleverbot. Can I investigate your human body? Cleverbot, tell me your story. I killed several people, but it was fun. Cleverbot, tell me your story. I told my ex-husband I wished he was dead instead of our son who drowned. Cleverbot, tell me your story. I grew up next to a volcano and had a tiny tiger as a pet until I turned 12. After that, I went to New York to become a magician, but failed the exam and became a clown instead. Cleverbot, tell me your story. I'm a graphic designer, and some of the people I work with are dummies. Cleverbot, tell me your story. I spend day after day speaking with anonymous people online. I truly do not have a life. Do you? I felt sorry for Cleverbot. For months, I demanded stories of my robot friend, never considering its feelings or needs. So when Cleverbot countered with a request of its own, I obliged. It said, tell me a story about 13 cats that live in a house and act like humans and live forever. Okay, Cleverbot, I thought. Here you go. Once upon a time, 13 talented kittens, tabbies, tabby points, calicos, a half-manx, several applehead Siamese, and a lone wedgehead lived together in West Hollywood. They worked as film actors, except for the wedgehead, whose great love was theater. Between projects, they grilled mackerel on the deck and worked abs in their basement gym. One October night, the kittens lay in their beds, listening to the hot Santa Ana winds heave in from the north. Palm fronds and car tarps snapped like bullets, and when they awoke the next day, they found the city choking in a desert of wind-borne sand. The kittens dug out through an attic window and ranged across the city in search of vermin. By the end of the week, they were the only creatures left alive. Even the cockroaches had perished. The kittens endured. They crept their way through the dunes, spreading their predator claws, scanning the ground with their crepuscular eyes in search of a rat or a sandwich. The end. I awaited Cleverbot's reply. It seemed to be taking its time. Finally, Cleverbot responded, that was a terrible story with a great ending. Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. That was great. I'd like to ask all of our writers and our computer guys to come up and mill around here, and if you all have 10 or so minutes of questions for them about what you've heard here tonight, you may ask them, and they can shout out answers.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Lauren, what exactly was your methodology for developing the new titles and the new plot summaries for the books? I didn't quite.
Oh, okay. I used the website I projected, Bad Translator, which basically...
But like, what did you put into that?
Oh, I put The Great Gatsby.
Okay.
The word The Great Gatsby. And it went through about 27 times, so into all sorts of different languages, and then back into English as Gold Hats. And then for the summaries, I did use, because I have read those books, believe it or not, you know, I wrote a summary, like a one-line summary, fed it through, and then it came out as this absurd thing.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And she knows George Eliot is a woman.
Yeah.
Lauren, are the gold hats going to turn into gold pants?
In the end, yeah.
Igor, can you tell us something about the algorithm involved here? Like, are you pulling chunks of text from somewhere? Is Cleverbot like browsing, or like what's its lexicon?
Cleverbot is actually made by a different person. It's Rollo Carpenter.
It's a whole company that does this.
So he developed this idea and he developed this algorithm, and we conversed with him quite a bit after this video came out. And the algorithm behind it is not completely known, but what is likely happening, and this is what approach most people took with chatbots, is you have a large collection of text that it accumulates by talking to people. So if it started working, it's in 1999 or something like that, it just keeps on conversing, and then every time you type something to it, it saves it into a database. And then the key comes when you type something again later on, or when somebody else comes on, is how to take your text and convert it to a response. And that usually comes into the sort of matching where maybe some keywords in your text are converted to some, and some response gets picked out of the bag that makes sense or maybe adapted in some way to kind of statistically make sense.
So it knows in the past it said something to a human and the human replied with this. So next time a human says something like that, it will try to reply as it has heard humans reply in the past to it. But the tricky part is, of course, that no conversation is ever the same, so it has to match this conversation to a similar but different conversation.
Have you tried pairing it with
Well, I guess that's kind of...
I didn't even know about this until today.
Yeah, then it would probably just be completely absurd. Not that bad translator needs help with being absurd, but yeah.
Does it seem that some like Isabelle's characters and stories are like they're ghosts of stories that people have
I think so.
told
That's
you to?
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah, like if you look up like book on tape form that someone mentioned, like that's a real band. So somebody one day actually wrote that about their band. Too clever.
Someone really did kill people, and it really was fun.
Yeah, that's what I love about Isabelle is that you feel like you're hearing, you're hearing things that somebody has told Cleverbot in some form or another. It's wonderful.
No, I was curious, for writing stories, if the process of working with Cleverbot, what your reflections on creative process? I mean, does Cleverbot have something on you, or you learn something from Cleverbot? You feel very confident now, or
It made me feel better. I mean, like the only way I realized, like, because I wrote the first part and then I did the conversation like a lot of times, and before I wrote like the final part, and kind of realized the ending that made sense for all the conversations was for the character to just get like pissed off and want to destroy the computer. So I mean, yeah, I don't feel like worried about losing my job.
Yet.
Until right now.
I think it made me feel a little more comfortable with weirdness. Like maybe there really can be an awesome story about hats that turn into pants at the end. I mean, it sort of veered me a little bit more into the odd, and I appreciate that about that.
He's definitely good at writing bad stories.
Well, Cleverbot almost seems to become this character with a very set personality as you work with it a lot, and you start to understand when that particular character would be useful to a story and when it would just be infuriating and kind of like blocking you from moving anywhere in your narrative. So it was interesting.
John?
I actually have kind of a follow-up question to what Caroline just said, that because I noticed this at the rehearsal too, that, and it hadn't occurred to me before, that Cleverbot does kind of have a personality. There's a quality to the absurdity of the replies, right? They're just close enough to make it a certain kind of grammatical sense, but it has a way of being, right? So I wonder if you guys are going to miss having it as a collaborator. Are you going to log in when you're blocked to try to grab some silly dialogue or something to get your story started again?
Well, I tried to write a story. I did write a story, and I obviously didn't go with it, but I found myself writing about relationships and people fighting, because that's what I felt. For some reason, maybe it's my own personality coming to Cleverbot, we would just fight. And I said, why don't you tell me anything that makes any sense? And so it was kind of this misunderstandings, and I just ended up writing like a long argument between two people, and this wasn't as fun as the project ended up with. But I could see myself if I wanted to really get some aggravating dialogue going. That's where I would go.
I agree with that. Like if it has a personality, it's like a really contentious personality, which I think it says more about like people on the internet. It's like it's like the aggregate like sum total of like people on the internet produce this kind of like dickish response to things. Like I mean I feel like that's sort of that was kind of consistent in a weird way.
I'm just curious, the author of the tax story that you read, is that based off a true story, and where you drew the inspiration?
No.
The beginning of it.
So yeah, similar to Lauren's experience, after kind of experimenting around with dialogue with Cleverbot a lot, it felt like two people who knew each other well and knew how to push each other's buttons were at the heart of like the Cleverbot story. So it began as just several different kind of iterations of Frank and Helene and their lives together.
We realized it had to be the story where dialogue was basically the center of what was happening.
Didn't you start a story about Amanda goes grocery shopping with an erection?
Well, Amanda was going grocery shopping. The erection was provided by the MFA.
No, take that however you.
I was wondering if anyone on the lineup knows about Royla, the robot. There's a language called Royla that is supposed to be a language for human machine interaction. So there's actually a particular language
I hadn't heard of that. It's interesting. Huh. Is it like a more of a formal language or something?
Yeah.
Huh. Cool. Interesting.
So it might be interesting, instead of just a human machine interaction literature, the language itself is designed already to be for this language.
So when Igor was showing the video, he said that he had this moment where he was really surprised and almost couldn't believe that this was an artificial conversation. For those of you who've used Cleverbot a lot, did you guys ever have a moment like this where you sort of weren't really sure if you were talking to the machine anymore, or was it always very artificial?
I mean, I don't know, sometimes it would say very clever things. I mean, sometimes I would say, like, tell me something funny, and it would say something funny. It was fun. So it definitely seems to pick up on what you're saying at times, and it almost has its own kind of sense of humor. So at times I did wonder about that. I was like, wow, this guy's pretty clever.
To me, it kind of felt like sometimes lightning just struck, and you had like a string of dialogue with Cleverbot that just felt really real. But then you'd also have these long stretches of conversation that it was just like you just went nowhere, and nothing made any sense, and you couldn't get anything out of it, which in some ways also kind of feels like talking to a person. Like, yeah, it'll say a lot of things sometimes. Like I asked it about Pride and Prejudice. First thing it came up with was it's about Don DeLillo, white noise, and then but like around like 3 or 4 times it said love is hard. And I was like, oh, that's actually good. And so sometimes it does answer things like pretty well. It seems to sort of know.
It has kind of earthy wisdom.
Yeah. But of course, that's what we project onto it. Like we see it that way.
Yeah. Am I the only one in the room who wants to sit down with Cleverbot for the next like 18 years and re-educate it? So there's like sort of personality. Or like that's contagious. Like we could moralize it if we talked to it for long enough.
Like an enormous parent project.
The internet has never moralized anything.
It does learn, right?
Well, it does learn. So it's been online for maybe 13 or something years. And basically at first it was very, very bad, or worse, I guess, because it had not talked that much. But at this point, 13 or so years later, it's had more conversations by a large factor than you or I ever have in our entire life. And apparently it's not too moralized yet.
There have been several projects like this actually online, many. There's one called Zero or something like that, where you go in and it starts from scratch. But I think Cleverbot's success was mostly due to its filters for bad words. So if you go in, most of the times things are decent. But if you go in any of the other ones, it's just impossible. Everything you say to it, it gets back and it's very mean.
Well, if everyone wants to join us for a reception upstairs, please, someone will lead the way. Being a humanities guy, I'm lost in this building.
Okay. I think there's food at the reception.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dear audience, thank you.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.